Welcome
Welcome to
to
the
the fish
mouthpiece.
mouthpiece.
Fish mouthpiece, yes. Welcome to this very, very special episode because we're talking about the long-awaited Matusow documentary. It's finally here after it feels like 2 or 3 years of just talking about it on this podcast. Ever since the very beginning, here we are finally discussing it.
And much like our previous movie review, we have the big stockbroker Larry here. He watched this documentary with us a couple days ago, so he got to experience the ups and downs of Mr. Mike Matusow over the last couple of years with us. Watching this on Amazon Video. This documentary, I believe it came out in the middle of December, and we only finally got a chance to watch it this past Monday. And I have a lot to say. I'm sure both of you do as well.
Yep.
But Larry, let you take it from here. Just anything you want to say right now before we start talking.
Did Jake Paul get his start this way?
I don't know, perhaps.
Perhaps some kind of podcast. Let's begin on the mysterious Mr. Matusow, shall we?
Yes, and so this documentary is about 2 hours long. I think the director is by this guy named Frank Zarillo. I've never heard him before, so I'll just interpret this as this is one of his early works, I assume, in the documentary world. And I know Larry, I know that you've probably watched more documentaries than me and Sam combined at this point. I know you're a big fan of them. What are the sort of things you look for in a documentary before you begin to watch it?
Um, I think there's sort of two or three levels of a documentary. I mean, the first thing is just, does it tell its story, right? So, do you learn about its subject? So, I mean, that's like the par level of any documentary. The exceptional ones are the ones that shed a larger light on a larger issue. And then, just is there sort of unique features to this documentary, which I'm going to suggest there are. I'm going to suggest there are.
Mhm.
There are some things on this documentary that you don't see in a lot of others. But I guess we'll get to that.
And Sam, how about you? I know we discussed documentaries before, but what are sort of like maybe the key principles of a documentary film that you really need to see for it to be successful?
Yeah, well, there's a few subtypes of documentaries, right? There's documentaries that are biographical, which are about one subject, and then there's documentaries that are more sort of, I'd say, event focused, that are exploring a specific event in time and breaking down what happened. And then there's, sort of television documentaries that are explaining concepts, or, this is how physics works, this is how politics works, things like that. Obviously, this is a biographical documentary. It's about Mike Matusow. We see other people throughout the documentary, murderer's row of all sorts of great poker players who we'll get into. But this is fundamentally about Mike Matusow. And the thing that I like about biographical documentaries is when they take their subject and then build out from them. Like, for example, the movie Citizen 4 is about Edward Snowden, but it's not just a biography of him. It takes his story and builds it out to talk about global surveillance and what his discoveries were like and how his discoveries affected the world. And there's other stories that tie into his story. OJ Made in America, same deal. It's about OJ Simpson, but it's about what he represents in Black America and where he came from and how his trial affected the conversation about race and domestic violence and all these other subjects. So, watching this documentary, obviously Ben and I know a lot about Mike Matusow. He's had a very, very long career. He was before the poker boom, a seminal figure during the poker boom, and he's maintained his career afterward. I was curious to see how they would describe Mike Matusow, but also take his story and build it out to talk about tournament poker and how poker has evolved over time. And we'll get into how exactly that panned out.
Yeah, for me, again, there's really with this maybe like 15 or so poker documentaries that we've discussed so far. They've really kind of been any sort of type of documentary you can think of. With that sort of PowerPoint-ish type documentary. We've had some biographical, detailed ones. We have sort of a almost like historical, like here's a moment, here's a just like a 6 month period in someone's life, and let's just follow them day to day and see what happens. We kind of got a combination of all three of those facets of documentaries in this film, actually, because there's really kind of maybe like two main narrative threads throughout this film. The first one is following Matusow from 2021 up until 2023. The second one is kind of intercutting in his background story for the most part in chronological order, while intermixing just sort of random daily events, daily life in his life during these World Series of Poker summers in the early 2020s. And as a result of that structure, the pacing really kind of is all over the place. And I did feel like the narrative was kind of aimless as far as giving us a focused, tight, concise uh, sort of springboard for seeing a look into the poker world. So starting off with this film, it begins with some old sort of like stock poker footage from '07. And this is kind of a regular feature. They'll splice in like Poker After Dark or High Stakes Poker, clips of Matusow intermixed in, and almost kind of at random at times, showing him kind of in his peak sort of prime TV spotlight form, and then intermixing in obviously with modern day footage from the 2020s.
Yeah, I mean, this is a common technique to do something like this, start the documentary by showing a figure at their height and then, to kind of explain as time goes on how they fell, or vice versa, to show a figure at their lowest moment and then you show how they fell, or rose from that or something like that. In other words, cutting across years and cutting across time. So when I saw this clip initially, I thought, okay, good, this is a conventional way to start the documentary. But as you said, there are just so many different like little clips of Matusow's peak in the mid 2000s just sort of spliced in. Sometimes it's effective, like when he's talking about the house that he bought with his money and how he eventually lost it. Okay, so you show a little clip of him touring his house, and that makes sense because he's talking about the house. But in other times, it's just completely random and it just doesn't work.
And then after those early clips, we cut to 2021 with Massa at the Rio, and we kind of got this montage of clips of players talking about him, what he means to them, what he means to poker, who Matusow is, and then around the 4 minute mark, something pretty remarkable happens. Larry, why don't you tell us what you saw about 4 minutes
I
in?
don't know. What could that mean? I don't know. It could mean that somebody we know made a cameo appearance.
Really? It's almost as if my 3 year ago trip to Las Vegas bore even more famous fruit here. And that's right, everybody. Me, Zach Grossack, and Adam Grossack, during our infamous viral conversation with Mike Matusow that we posted years ago on our channel here. The end part of that conversation was when Matusow's documentary crew began filming us, and there's about a 1 second, maybe 1.5 second long clip of the three of us with Matusow on in frame, and I'm kind of facing the camera, and this is overcut with Matusow talking about his relationship with fans, and so you kind of have like boom, bam. It was an unbelievable happenstance.
I think I think it was a full 4 seconds.
Maybe
Okay,
it was
so
more.
so you say 1 to 3. I'm like 4 beautiful seconds. Clearly the highlight of the film.
Pretty crazy, and honestly, I didn't think there was a chance in hell that I would actually be in this documentary. I knew that, they film hours and hours and hours of stuff on the cameras, and they have to edit down to a 2 hour film, and you have, just so many more important things to cut in there. So I was so ecstatic, and I can't thank Minnesota's editors enough for including me in the movie. And automatically 5 out of 5 stars for me just for that one moment alone.
Same here, more or less for me. I mean, we'll get into the nitty-gritty about the documentary, but yeah, that was a wonderful surprise to see you there, and as well as Adam and Zachary, of course.
Yes, and it's kind of funny because
No, I was
because
just saying, have you heard from the Academy Award people or no? That was not in
Not
the.
yet. Not yet.
No,
And
okay.
it's kind of funny because Zach and Adam both have their own Wikipedia pages, as does Matusow. So you have a picture of me and three folks with their own Wikipedia page at the same time. That's pretty special. And so from that point, though, we sat back down, relaxed, and then we went to watch the rest of the movie. And at the very start of so again, the film is kind of broken into almost like chapters, like as if you were gonna go to a DVD menu screen and do scene select, and you'd see the little subtitle below the scene describing what was coming. And so family backgrounds, a big thing here. And throughout the entire, maybe there's probably like maybe 20 little like almost like title cards throughout the film that sort of are the prelude to that subject being discussed in the film. And it got me thinking. I understand that this is not an uncommon tool in a documentary filmmaker to use things like that. But I was wondering if maybe it would have just been more organic to not have those at all in the film.
Yeah, I think so too, especially because these segments would often just jump back and forth in time. We're cutting back to the 2021 World Series of Poker with Matusow competing, and also just random stuff. Like in this sequence, as you mentioned, this is Matusow's personal background. He's talking about his family. They were Russian Jews. His dad didn't really click with him. He's talking about him getting into the game, starting out in video poker, and then being taught how to play poker. And that's all okay. That's all cool. And at the end of this sequence, it cuts to him injuring his back and then him talking about setting up his radio show, which is events that occurred in the far future compared to this. This is like the 1990s. These are events that occurred at the end of the 2000s. So it's just very strange. If you're going to have chapters like this, that's okay. But you have to just stay within that chapter, have it be a cohesive unit, and tell the story linearly in a straightforward fashion.
I agree. And Larry, I know that you really didn't know that much about Matusow beyond maybe the little things that we might have told you about in passing over the years. So this background, what did anything of the story really jump out at you? Did you find it interesting at this point, or what was sort of your thought process at this point?
Yeah, other than that he was a crazy guy, I didn't know anything about him.
Mhm.
So, I'm going to say that, I just want to jump in on one thing that I really liked about the movie.
Mhm.
And that is there was an honesty in it. I think because he's such a crazy guy, he allowed himself to be exposed in a way that not many people do. One of the problems with documentary filmmaking in 2025 is that the subject has editorial control over it. So Netflix and HBO and any a number of other documentaries are now like, oh, we're going to let you take over and tell your story. Saw the Arnold Schwarzenegger documentary. Arnold gets to tell Arnold's story. In this case, we see a fat, hapless dude in extraordinary pain getting being operated on and getting injections and seeing him lie like a beached whale on his floor playing with his near dead cat. So those were kind of unusual images to see, and it created a portrait that I think is kind of honest. I think that we all know who he is now, and I consider that to be positive about the film.
Your thoughts remind me of when we watched the Kid Poker documentary, where Negrano definitely sort of had that control over the edit of what was said, what was shown. And so I do think that this film is a good contrast in what happens when you just really take your finger off of the edit button and just sort of be as raw and honest as possible for the subject being covered.
Right, a certain kind of edit. So again, there's editing problems that both of you have, mentioned already, and I would say is, the biggest flaw with it is that it was too long, and they needed to edit a lot of it out. But in terms of getting a sense of who this person is and his successes and largely failures, I mean, I think it would be more like failures in big letters and then successes in smaller letters. I definitely know who this guy is, who you guys have talked about, with rolls of your eyes and laughs and smiles for years.
Mhm. And then as far as some of the earlier chapters that do kind of feature other players in this film, we do have a bit about Scotty Nguyen, the Prince of Poker, the story behind him entering the main event in 1998, Matusow being a partial backer of Scotty, and that sort of another legend of poker was born from that happenstance right there. And then we also have Kid Poker, Daniel Negreanu gets his own segment. And later on, we also get Stu Unger. So then again, it's a lot of stuff it's kind of, if you combine a lot of the past topics that we discussed at length from past documentaries, you kind of get a little flavor of those in this film too. So you definitely get your money from it. You're trying to consolidate a lot of players into one film. This does help you with that if you're trying to be as efficient as possible.
Yeah, and another poker documentary this reminded me of, Ben, was To Be Determined, which was the documentary about Oscar, who was sort of like a low stakes grinder. And that documentary I thought was very honest in that you have Matt Berkey and other professionals who's trying to coach Oscar saying, we don't think you have the skills needed to make it. And Oscar is struggling and he has to become an Uber driver and all of that. I thought that was very honest. And I totally agree with Larry on this one, that this is a very honest and intense documentary at some points, when he's, in a hospital, when he's getting injections in his back and he's crying in pain, when he's arguing with not just his brother, but his mother about taking care of his father who was dying, and how he basically squandered away his money. I think the most intense moment in this whole documentary is when he's having an argument with his brother. His brother's being interviewed, and the camera kind of turns, and there's Mike off to the side, and they start getting into an argument with each other about the money that he squandered and blew away. I thought that was a really intense, authentic moment. And if that had been more of the center of the documentary, I think that would have really worked. But again, that comes a lot later than what we're discussing. Like, we're kind of jumping around in the same way that this documentary was jumping around. I mean, before we get to that point, we're talking, we're having interviews with Negranu. We're having Mike talking about how he has to spend $70 on a tank of gas. We have him, yelling at Phil Hellmuth, have him talking about taking ecstasy. We just keep jumping all over the place within this documentary, which is a real shame, because you have these intense, authentic moments, and then you just cut to some antic with Mike.
I agree, and also I did think that the framing of this film of the narrative could have been done better, because this part is unfocused on assumption that the idea of showing him playing in 21, 22, and 23 is that he's trying to like find redemption and win that bracelet, but it's kind of thrown towards the very end. It's not really filtered throughout the entire thing. Like you could have had the opening interviews of Matusow saying, "I'm coming into 2021 main event or Bullshit Poker. I'm going to win a bracelet. I'm going to restore my honor. I want to get in the Hall of Fame." And you kind of frame it so that the end goal of the film is for him to sort of achieve that poker glory that he once had. It never quite harps on that idea, even by the end when we're seeing him, make these foul tables and these, 7-card stud, dealer's choice, these kind of events. And it never quite, hits that gear as far as giving us a dedicated experience. Like in the film Super Size Me, Morgan Spurlock is doing the 30-day McDonald's challenge, while intercutting in bits about the fast food industry, kids being unhealthy and whatnot. And it's his very opening shot is him disclosing the challenge, and then it ends with him finishing the challenge. Whereas we don't quite have that sort of bread to the sandwich of this film for this particular goal of his.
Do you feel that it explained at all what made him a good player? There was a little bit somewhere again early in the film, if that's where we're still on, well, he can read people really good. My sense is that a lot of people say that. And I'm not saying that that's not a super important part of poker. It is a super important part of poker, trying to get a pulse on other people. But I don't think I really ever got a sense of, yeah, he started video poker and he was good at it. He did it a lot. So I kind of get that. But in your interview that you guys did, my favorite podcast of your podcasts, the Raymer interview, who made an appearance in here. I mean, I learned a lot from that podcast that you guys did, but certainly I got a sense of what does it take to be a world-class player from him. And I didn't get that sense here. I kind of got a sense of, okay, he was somebody whom in the poker boom days was one of the big names from that period of time. They repeated that fact 10 times in the movie. They didn't need to do that so many different times. There was his glory day. Didn't really explain again too much on how he was such a great player then. And just sort of reaching for it for the rest of the time. A little unconvincing for me. I'm not sure, how good is he? Is he a good player, or is he a character who's so enjoyable? Is he a good player?
I would say compare, like, right now he's a great player that oftentimes, because of his pain, because of his temper, he maybe can be playing his best poker for a short burst of time, and then if one part of his engine is broken, it ruins the whole thing, and he's not a great player. And so we see him make these deep runs in these modern World Series of Poker events. He'll make it to the final 2 tables, the final table, but he just kind of stalls out because he blames the cards. He's the first guy to blame the cards he's been dealt for why he lost, or he took too many Adderall and he couldn't focus or something like that. But so I think that he had the nucleus of his poker chops is still in there nowadays, And again, back in the early 2000s, maybe late 90s, I'm not too sure, but the early 2000s, he was, one of the most popular poker players in the world. He was always at the main event featured table. He made multiple deep runs in the main event. He got a final table in 2001. He made the final table in 2005. He won the Tournament of Champions in 05. So again, he had these, pretty impressive big scores. And then even in 2013, he won the heads-up championship against Helmuth. So he, had the poker chops, but, whether it was just drug use, whether it was his short fuse, he just, again, it's like a top tennis player who, can crush anybody in any given match, but, they lose the first set, they're done for the rest of the match. Kind of like that, if you ask me.
Yeah, I would agree with Ben on that one. I mean, just going over some of Mike's accomplishments, he's won 4 bracelets at the World Series of Poker. He also won the Tournament of Champions in 2005. He's made 27 final tables. He's made 10 final tables at the World Poker Tour. He's won over $10 million. I mean, he's a very accomplished player. Toward the back half of the documentary, there's a lot of talk about him making the World Series of Poker Hall of Fame. Is he one of the greats of all time? And I think, most people would agree that, yes, like he has the qualifications. Maybe he just needs one more accomplishment to get there, but he has the qualifications to make it. It's just the game has kind of passed him by a little bit. It's gone away from, gut feelings and reading people into more math and studying solvers and studying game theory optimal and these sort of advanced strategies, which he doesn't really have familiarity with. And also his temper and his personality. I mean, that's I agree with you, Larry, that I don't really feel this documentary gives a good sense of his accomplishments. I also don't think it gives a really good sense of some of the reasons why he's not going to make the Hall of Fame, or he might not make the Hall of Fame. Like, it keeps talking about, he has these uncontroversial opinions, and we get a couple of glimpses of that, but we don't really get like the antics that, people have talked about over the last couple of years. Like he's doxed people online, he's issued like death threats against people, he's done, really like genuinely bad things. It goes into his arrest in 2003, which we can talk about in a moment. But, there's a lot of parts of Mike's story that are missing from this. I mean, even his 05 run where he made the final table, that's really not discussed at all in this document. I don't think there's any clips. There was no interview with Joe Hashem or anybody who was at the final table with him. You'd think they'd want to include that, but they just didn't do that.
So basically, again, he was, in that echelon of top players, particularly in none limit hold'em back then. We don't, I don't feel like his like mixed games or Omaha poker chops were really a big, prominent thing back then. I think it was mostly a none limit hold'em focused poker world back then, so that was why that was his main focus there. And yeah, I totally agree that we don't see too much of what makes him a good player. And I mean, we see a few clips of him winning hands on high stakes poker, or an all-in. We had kings against 10-8 suited at the WPT or whatever, but he actually lost a hand actually. But we don't really see him make like that killer read so that we see why he won the hand. We just see that he won a hand. In any case, interspliced with, I was taking notes obviously while I was watching this film, and it was mostly just kind of like bullet points of clips that I saw, or what the different sections that the film is divided into. And as a registered nurse, I was really drawn to just how much of his medical background we really saw. We see some very raw rehab footage of him in his wheelchair trying to stand up and working on those like the bars where you walk using the support of your arms on the bars and stuff. And I was really, really taken aback by just this, how willing he was to show us these sort of moments of his life. And we see, how it's comparing him back then after his original back injury with his current medical regimen, whether it's these electrodes that he puts on his back to like stimulate his nerves, his bottles of prescription pills that he takes for pain, for his psychological stuff, for everything, as well as his cat even gets in on the action, as we see his cat actually receiving chemotherapy. And that was something that I just have never seen or even considered thinking about in my entire life.
Yeah, that was really weird. I mean, the cats kind of bob and weave throughout the coverage, and there's just a lot of footage. When Mike is in the house, you see the cats. But yeah, to see him just talking about this 20-year-old cat that's getting chemotherapy is really something. And also, I mean, that little sequence where he's talking about his pain pills, and there's just the shot of all of these pain pills out on the table, like what, 12 different bottles of stuff? Like I couldn't believe it. It was crazy.
And he's addicted to, I think at the end of the movie, he was still addicted to opioids, right? Because he talked about cutting it back down to 25% or something like that.
It wasn't from addiction. It was just from kind of weaning off of those because of, the side effects and the cross interactions of other pills. I mean, I think that he had a better control over that compared to his, drug abuse in the his earlier life.
I'm not sure that he has better. I'm not sure he has better use of it now because again, it was on that. Well, once I get down, I'm cutting me back to see how. I think it was at that. But anyways, maybe he does. Um, but
Mhm.
that's sort of does every a quote happy ending? Was it a happy ending here? I think that this was not a happy ending. I
Mhm.
think this is a portrait of an utter failure of a human being. Sam had mentioned earlier, the good documentaries broaden out. And so I have a suggestion for a broadening out. And the broadening out would be kids don't be like this. Here is somebody who made $10 million, which is a enormous amount of money. And, he liked to talk about how much fun he had with the prostitutes and with the drugs and the strippers. Like, if you have $10 million, yes, yes, out there in YouTube land, you can have a really good time. And there's people out there who will happily take your money. But you think about what his life is: prison, drug addiction, bankruptcy, family estrangement, a lack of any kind of relationship with, women. He bemoans, well, I'm never going to have children. Yeah, don't have children. I mean, if anything, the broadening of the story is this is really not something that anybody should ever be. I mean, it's, he's in a wheelchair. Um, he speaks about the addiction to sports gambling. And so that sounded like a factor. He said that's so much harder than getting a certain drug addiction or alcohol, whatever it was. So, I mean, to me, there's an overarching sadness to this story that this is really an utter failure of a person, of a human being. And Las Vegas is kind of full of them, So I think, there's a famous line about Las Vegas, Harry Binion. There's a lot of money to be made making little people feel like big people, and I think that's the mirage, pun intended, of Las Vegas, and I feel he embodies it. Now that's a little bit of it's a very judgmental thing for me to say, and because there's a little bit of charm to him and a little bit of fun to him, I certainly wish him well. Um, but I think it's also a super sorry tale, and that would be the broadening out story of a failure of somebody who's kind of famous.
Mhm. I mean, because I ask you, I know because there is a section where a few poker players say don't play poker professionally. Money management's a
Yeah,
big issue. It's already so competitive so that angle is definitely given a minute or two
yeah.
in it here. And then I have to ask you because there's a relatively long section of his background getting into drugs, that infamous ecstasy cruise, and how that eventually led him into getting in 6 months in jail. And I ask you, during that sequence, did you find yourself losing any sympathy for Matusow, or was it kind of a balance of, well, I feel bad, but I also feel like he, did to himself?
Um, I know I never like to say did to yourself.
Mhm.
So fundamentally, he has a certain charm, and I like that. And I also think that genuinely, if there's one, the testimonials are testimonials in films, but I think the testimonials have definitely convinced me that, as sort of a friend, he's kind of a fun friend to have, and I think there was some general warmth there. So I have sympathy for him and empathy for him. And I don't wish evil on anybody, certainly not somebody like him. So I know I'm getting a little high-handed by saying he's an epitome of a failure. I do believe he is, right? That I mean, he's in a horrible predicament right now in life. But I still have some sympathy for him, and I don't have much hope for him. I don't, his best years are not the years to come. He was still in debt at the end of the film, right? He paid back some guy $100,000 who lent him, or some kind of large sum, which shouldn't be. That's a lot of money too. And he said he still owed 100 or 200,000, and I'll play nickel games if I have to get it back for him or whatever. That's a bit of a sorry tale. It's not going to end well for him. It hasn't ended well for him. So I'm sort of making that comment. I know it's heavy-handed and judgmental, but I definitely have sympathy for him and sort of wish him well. It would be a wonderful story for him to win a bracelet somewhere and be in the Poker Hall of Fame. I only wish that for him.
Mm-hmm.
So much because I know we discussed this background of his drug, undercover cop story when we discussed his book Check Raising the Devil. So did this film change any of your thoughts on that whole predicament he was in?
Well, we went over Check Raising the Devil previously, and it's essentially the story he tells is more or less the same that he tells in the book. So we both already knew these details. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously one thing to hear him talking about it versus him writing about it, him looking into a camera, and actually at one point saying, I don't really like to think about being in jail for 6 months. He was put on prison duty, or kitchen duty rather, excuse me, and was not treated very well. He's talked about that before in the past. So again, I mean, as Larry just said, I mean, he's kind of a miserable, wretched person. I don't mean that in a sense of being insulting. I mean, I think he would say like he's been through a lot of pain in his life. He's not an optimistic person. But it is compelling to hear him talk about this, and I do have sympathy for him. And he hasn't committed any crimes since. He's talked about in his podcast how he doesn't even speed. He puts his car on cruise control at the speed limit, and he won't even go over the speed limit. I think he has come out of it a somewhat better person. He's not on illicit drugs anymore. He's weaning himself off of medication. But yeah, I mean, I do feel sorry for Matusow, and I want him to get better. I want him to be okay, pay off his debts, win another bracelet, make another main event run. I think a lot of people do want to see that too. And, hopefully, again, scale back some of the behaviors, like I mentioned, him doxing people and him just, making bad jokes and just, being a little bit too offensive for his own good. Hopefully he can scale that back.
So it does kind of seem like that his drug usage kind of just really shortened his internal fuse for what can set him off. Like I feel like, we have, our coping mechanisms, and we have, our ability to control our emotions. He just kind of lacks that emotional control or that impulse control that drugs can really affect the circuitry inside your head. So again, I feel like he's kind of permanently, the chemistry and biology in his head is kind of permanently changed. But I feel like hopefully maybe over time he'll be able to adapt with sort of whatever mechanisms he can work on to prevent that from being an issue for his impulse control.
I don't know how it could be. I like what you just said. That was well worded, Ben. But the thing that I admire about these tournaments is the amount of concentration and discipline in order to be successful. I do find that that's the most interesting thing to me in poker as a non-poker fan, is that the pressure and the amount of concentration and the discipline to stay within your lane and to stay focused and present, to know how to pounce when your moment comes. I can't imagine that it's possible for him. I can't imagine that he can keep himself tethered. There must be any number of disappointments in these long tournaments that you've got to gut through. I can't see how he could do that. So, it'd be a nice story for him to win one, right? But I can't imagine that would be the case. And is the last time 2005 that he was at a moment? When was the last time?
So in 2023, he made it to the final two of a stud bracelet event. So he finished runner up, but he was at a big disadvantage with two left. So I wasn't surprised when he lost. As far as the main event, he's cashed in. I think he cashed in 4 straight main events in the late 2010s into the early 2020s. But his last sort of deep run, like 9th place in 05, was, again, that's 20 years ago at this point practically.
Yeah.
But again, the main events are now much bigger than they were back in the olden days, of course. And so it kind of depends on what your barometer is for success in that category of poker.
Would you say that he has had success in the last significant, what kind of success in the last 5 to 10 years?
Well, this film does show a lot of those
Yeah.
successes. He makes multiple final tables. Negreanu, Hellmuth, and Matusow there was one summer where they both each made, multiple final tables each. And I would say making, two final tables in a one World Series would be a successful World Series.
I
If
agree. Yeah.
I would say, winning a bracelet obviously would be a big one too, but I would say two final tables, just even if you had zero accomplishments besides those two spots, I would say would be successful to at least a certain degree. Obviously, pros have high expectations, and so if you finish like first one out the final table, that's one thing. But I would say getting to two would be pretty successful. Sam,
Okay.
what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at his Hendon Mob right now. Hendon Mob is the website that tracks tournament performances. So yeah, I mean, in 2023, he made close to $300,000 at the World Series of Poker. That's pretty much all he does now is just World Series of Poker stuff. Which is pretty good. I don't know if he turned a profit for the summer or not, but close to it. Last year he wasn't as successful, but he still made just sort of doing a count here, close to $100,000. He made 7 different cashes at the World Series of Poker, including an online event. He got 10th place in an event. He got 20th in another event. So I mean, he's still putting up respectable results. I mean, I think anybody would be content with these performances. He just hasn't, as I mentioned, had that one bracelet event or that a World Poker Tour event or a circuit event where he could put his name on and be like, yes, I'm back, I've made this big accomplishment. I mean, he did make also a deep run in the main event in 2008. Ben, right? Remember that run?
Oh, that's
So
right.
yes, I mean he can make a deep run in the main event, I think. But something else that I was reminded of when you were talking, Larry, was this documentary didn't go into the Mike Matusow blow up, which was a big part of his public image, that he'd be this great player for days on, and then all of a sudden he would screw up one big hand and it would cost him his whole tournament. I mean, this was brought up repeatedly on the ESPN coverage back in the day. Norman Chad would bring this up pretty much every single time Mike Matusow ever played a hand. So this wasn't even mentioned in passing once. So again, it's just very strange what this documentary chose to focus on in terms of his image.
Well, I would say this, that they didn't really use too many World Series of Poker or ESPN clips. I mean, they showed the Matusow Raymer square off in '04, but for the most part, it's mostly just other stock footage of high stakes poker or poker after dark. And then by the time it gets to the late 2020 to the early 2020s, that's sort of the just sort of behind the scenes filming from the poker room, from the rail or whatever. So it would be a little bit different for those for that summer. And so, yeah, we don't see too much of the blow up talk, but we see Mike blow up. Like there's one clip of him yelling as he's putting his chips in the bag at the end of the 10K. I think it was a dealer's choice event or something at that. So we kind of see a not middle of the hand blow up, but a verbal blow up of sorts instead of the traditional one.
Mm-hmm.
And so other clips here that really kind of jumped out at me that I took notes on would be this one section where Ryan Feldman talks about putting pain patch or pain ointment on Mike. And, Ryan Feldman is, Larry, since you don't know, he's sort of the producer of a YouTube poker stream of a daily high stakes cash game. And so I don't really associate him too much with like tournament poker, so it was kind of fun to see him here. And I gotta say, Larry, how many people do you know in your life that you would be willing to rub pain ointment on if they asked you? Can you hear me?
Just you, Ben.
Oh well. Yeah, it must be freezing on me a little bit. It's better now.
Yeah, I can hear you. Not so many, but I would say.
Yeah. And then after that segment, we do see some more about a particular rehab setback that Matusow had with his back because he had to find the proper surgeon to avoid being paralyzed from his it's sort of like a spinal nerve issue that kind of has multiple things wrong with his that was sparked by this sort of injury he had of Dan Bilzerian. And again, the medical mind in me really was drawn in by this story here.
Yeah, it's compelling material. It really is. I mean, I'm not somebody who's medically minded, but just the fact that he's willing to share all this information and go into the nuances of this, I think that's really, really significant for him to do that.
Yeah, and again, I feel like you really could have had an amazing documentary here if you were splicing in his struggles with winning a bracelet nowadays and then intercutting in him struggling with rehab and sort of having some sort of real like narrative juice to tying in those two strands into a really strong film rope.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because really at this point in the documentary, this is really where the documentary loses focus. You know, once it goes through his arrest and then talks a little bit more about his pain, this is really where the documentary just starts to go on these tangents. There was that scene that I mentioned earlier with Mike and his brother arguing, which again I found very, very compelling and dramatic. But then it goes into, you know, Mike and Phil getting costumes for the World Series of Poker, and then his play in the main event in 2021, and then just all sorts of different stuff. It really, really just starts to just go into different places. And that had been a problem up until that point, but this is really where the problem magnifies. And I really don't understand what they were intending to do here. I mean, I guess in broad strokes, just tell the story of his main event run in 2021, show these, you know, interesting interactions with people. He talks to Tiffany Michelle and James Woods and all these other people, but you can't just throw in random conversations. You have to have them tell a story and cohese.
And Larry, I ask you, were you at all surprised to see James Woods in this film as much as he
No,
was?
no, I know that he's a poker guy. He just lost his house apparently, and I think in the fires in LA. No, I kind of knew that was coming.
Yeah. And you know, it's funny because I kind of enjoyed the scene where Helmuth is costume shopping with Massa. They picked some really goofy stuff, but I can't wait. I feel like this would have been great as like deleted scenes if this had like a DVD release of this film. You know, this would have been a great deleted scene. Uh, so just throwing it in there. And again, this film is probably about 20 to 25 minutes too long. And so this is a good, you know, maybe like 3, 4, 5 minute long bit that would have been, you know, good for the director's cut maybe, but for, you know, this film, it really needed to be, you know, trimmed off.
I thought it was lame. So I didn't really enjoy that. I agree with you. Maybe that would have been over the credits you show them or something, you know. I mean, that was just you know, there was a number of things. I mean, every time they talk about Las Vegas, they sort of showed whatever the hotel was that had that Beatles love show. They showed that hotel a few too many times. It just needed tightening on editing, and you know, I would say even more like 40 minutes shorter. I think 80-minute documentary would have been more than enough. So there was a lot of unnecessary stuff in there. Now, granted, I know that he's a big poker player, right? So you got that you know, that's somebody to include in a poker film, but didn't help the story.
And I do feel like the section where they discuss the death of Mike Matusow's father should have been maybe a little bit earlier in the film. Though I mean, maybe it happened, you know, chronologically after his jail time, which is, I guess, okay, fine. But you kind of had your family, some family scenes and family, you know, background earlier on, and so that maybe would have been better served to have been cut a bit more in one dedicated section of the film. And there was also, you mentioned, Sam, how much you love that scene with his brother. There was also a very telling phone call with Mike while he's driving, while on the phone with his mom. And they're kind of talking about money and about poker and just kind of the arrogance and cockiness that Matusow was displaying over the phone of his mom. And I really was surprised because I feel like with your parents, you know, you're usually a different person in front of your parents than you are with your friends, with your colleagues. And I feel like he just kind of his true arrogance and ego really still shown even just on with any sort of like, you know, mental filter and conversation with his mom on the phone there.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very surprising scene to hear that. Yeah, I mean, all of the interactions, I mean, just what, you know, his mother was saying throughout. There's plenty of opportunities where it's just her talking into the camera being interviewed. And I mean, she says like, yeah, he just blew all his money away. She wasn't around when he wasn't around when his father was dying, just all sorts of stuff, agreeing with his brother that, you know, his brother says all sorts of mean stuff about him and that Mike blew his money and all that. I mean, again, all that stuff is again really interesting and compelling. You know, I think this could have been a good hour and a half documentary, but it's not just enough to cut out the footage like Mike and Phil buying costumes. You have to have it be more centered. You have to have more of a cohesive story throughout it, right? If you want to have the 2021 World Series of Poker, that's okay, but take that as your central narrative and then build out from it. show us clips from that World Series of Poker, and then use, the footage of Mike Matusow talking about his life and his family talking about him, have those be natural extensions of the clips from the 2021 World Series of Poker. Like in Super Size Me, as you mentioned, Ben, it kind of bobs and weaves throughout. Like, here's the story of Morgan Spurlock on his 30-day experiment, and then there's other clips of him interviewing people, interviewing lobbyists for McDonald's, or talking about how in schools there aren't nutrition training. But those clips aren't just randomly spliced in. They're natural extensions of the scenes that we see of Morgan Spurlock eating all this McDonald's. They feel like they're there in the movie to be consequential and meaningful extensions of what he's going through and what he's talking about and what the problem of obesity is. That's just not the case here. So it's not just enough to cut out all this other footage. You have to have it be more of a cohesive center. It could be 3 hours long, this documentary. As long as it's all cohesive and it all translates together, then you can do that.
Yeah, so it's really around this point where I kind of felt the hot cold dynamic with the film, where I would love or enjoy one scene, then be like, this next one does not belong here at all. Like, for example, there's a visit to his old trailer home. He's driving past and he points out where he used to live, and that was something that okay, if you would splice this in with sort of like before and after sort of this redemption arc, that could have made sense to me. But thrown in just sort of off the top, oh, I used to live here. Okay, next scene, let's talk about a Twitter poll between Mike Matusow and Alan Kessler, who's more negative. Like, it just did not flow very organically like that at all. Larry, I know that you know Phil Hellmuth a little bit, Negreanu a little bit. Were there any poker players that you were, besides Matusow, that you were you felt like you learned something substantial about?
No.
No.
I don't think so. No.
Yeah.
Again, no.
Well, that's fair enough. Let's see. And then again, there's a section called the main event, Planet Hollywood, Tuesday, Once Upon a Time in Vegas, the Poker Brat. So they're riding along all these sections, and then it gets to a little clip here where Matusow is on camera after playing day 2 of the 2021 main event, and he mentioned briefly something about like picking all these marginal spots to win a hand or two. And that was a conversation that I had actually firsthand witnessed just prior to my conversation with Matusow, with Adam and Zach. And so that was pretty cool to see kind of the other half of what we had gotten on camera for our own recording versus what they were recording of him that I just saw in person. So that was also pretty cool.
Ben, why don't you just go through and just talk about your encounter with Matusow, given that this was shown in the movie?
Yeah, so again, this was just at the end of day 2. So Adam, I was taking a break from railing Adam. He was finishing up day 2. I think was it AB? No, whatever it was. It was day. I think it was maybe day 2C or something like that. And so Adam he said there's like 4 hands left, Ben. Come on down. So Zach and I both met him at his day 2 table as they're all bagging up their chips. And then Adam first mentioned he folded the last 4 orbits all in a row, and then for the end of the day. And then we all went into that sort of main poker room where the featured tables are a little bit behind the rest of the tables because they play a little bit slower. And so Matusow is talking to Jeff Platt about his day 2. He's complaining about max late reg, how players can enter the tournament late and avoid a lot of the nitty gritty of the tournament, and then they only have to play like 1 or 2 hands, and they're got more chips than me all of a sudden. Like, I've been working my ass off for 10 hours. I have 130,000. This guy sat down for 2 minutes and has 200,000. I don't believe it. And then they pick they pick all the marginal spots when I don't pick any of the marginal spots. And then it's right at that point his chips are now all bagged. Jeff Platt's walking away, and he's coming towards sort of that barrier between the common walk area and the TV table. And then from there, that is when we begin talking about Mike Matusow, big fan. I really was touched by your play in 08 when you made it like 30th place, and you were talking about how you were really sad to be out and all that stuff. And again, and then he talks, and then that's when Adam and Zach were all in there, and that's when that whole moment took place. But that was again one of the top highlights of that whole trip was that whole interaction. And of course, we got it on camera. My part of it with Adam and Zach, that got 9,000 views on YouTube. That was pretty cool. And then of course being on this film here it's made a full rounded great memory of that whole trip. Now it is now memorialized forever on film.
Very cool. Yeah, I just love that whole story and the fact that, you not only were put in the documentary, but you're actually able to hear him say him talk, and then you realized, oh yeah, I heard that, was just so cool.
Yeah, that's great. Great.
Yeah.
Fun story.
And then so then with the last sort of little bit of this film really just kind of amps up the pacing of each year of the World Series of Poker. So we have 2021 given the most time by far, and then 2022 kind of gets maybe like a fifth of the time that 2021 gets, and then 2023 gets maybe like half of that, and then 2024 gets even less of that. So again, it felt like they were exponentially increasing how little attention each of these individual years got when you probably could have, I mean, I kind of thought that 2021 was kind of the main year of focus. Like that was when we saw the most clips of his daily life and whatnot. So that maybe should have been the only year that they covered. And maybe having like in the coda or the epilogue, like he finished, second in this event, third in this event, or whatever in the upcoming years. But rather than doing that, they kind of just really butchered the pacing of the rest of the coverage we saw from those runs they had in the main event and the other side events.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, I was really surprised that they treated 2022, 2023, and 2024 like that. I say you can have an end montage where you talk about this is how he did in 2022 overall, this is how he did in 2023, this is how he did in 2024. And then you can add a little bit more about him finishing second in that bracelet event. Have that be, as sort of the crown jewel of the old schoolers are coming back and they're making deep runs. Mike Matusow got second place. He almost won a bracelet. Even though he didn't win, he showed that he's, still worth his stuff. And that could have been the crown jewel of that whole sequence. Instead, yeah, I mean, you get really short shrift on these 3 years, and then you have all this other footage. His cat dies. He reads this poem about Flash, his cat, and shows his like hair and his footprints, which I thought was kind of strange. It shows the World Poker Tour 20th anniversary. He was just there, okay, like he didn't really do anything. At the very beginning of the film, there's this question from the interviewer, how do you want to be remembered? And at the end, we see his answer. I'm okay with that. I kind of like
Me
that as
too.
a framing device. But beyond that, I mean, everything else in this, last like 15 minutes, like it felt very, very long. I don't know how long it was for sure. Just really, really dragged, especially the very, very end where it's Mikey standing in front of a fountain show in Vegas, which is impressive. I like the fountain show, but it just keeps going and going and going for like a minute. And then there's a montage afterward with text showing that like, oh yeah, Texas Dolly's dead. Phil Hellmuth is still playing. Like that was completely unnecessary.
Yeah, like literally that fountain shot, I thought that could have been a really touching moment of him sort of letting go of the past and enjoying the present, but it kept cutting back to the fountain, then his face, then the fountain, then his face. Like his face is not moving. It's not like he's like, smiling in one shot and then crying the next shot. It's just literally his face is just like it just wasn't a very emotional moment when I think like, it could have been with the right editor. Larry, what was your take on the last sort of fifth of the film as it was winding down? What do you think? Did you agree with us on this?
Yeah, I mean it's supposed to be sort of like a little pensive moment. There he is. He spent a lot of years there, right? Because he, had kind of grown up there. But it didn't work as a dramatic departure. Maybe I think to your point, it could have been a little bit shorter.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think back to when we very first watched the trailer for this film, and I recall like thinking it was going to be this like focused on being with strippers, and the shot of him like dancing on the pole with his shirt off, and I was glad that we didn't quite get there was like one shot of him doing that, and it was sort of meant to almost be as if it was done like years ago, like back when he was living the party lifestyle. So at least that wasn't like the whole film, but there was a couple scenes of him like getting drunk at restaurants and like passing out. That was just really off-putting. Like I guess I mean again, if he does this, then it's a raw look at how pathetic and how combination of alcohol and pills can really screw you up after a long day of poker. But I guess the film, the trailer was not emblematic of what the film experience was for me watching it. I would say, Sam. How about you?
Yeah, I remember watching the trailer and just being kind of horrified, honestly. I mean, there was that song, I don't know what the name of it is, like and like whenever that song is used in a trailer, I always think it's that's a red flag. I don't want to watch the movie. So I'm glad that this movie was more authentic, more honest, more about his life. You know, I thought him like dancing on the stripper pole, I thought that was kind of like goofy. You know,
Yeah.
it's okay to have a couple moments like that throughout the movie. You know, his sense of humor, his sense of charm, as Larry mentioned. But yeah, I mean, on the whole, I mean, again, just you know, you trim out all of these unnecessary scenes, you get it down to, I think you get this down to an hour based off of what's in the movie. And then if you want to make it an hour and a half, add some more footage about him talking about his pain, you know, flesh out his backstory a little bit more, talk about his '05 run in the main event, talk about his '08 run in the main event, make it more streamlined. And then, as I mentioned, have these sort of chapters that are breaking off of the main story of 2021. I think this could have been a really, really great, honest, biographical story of Mike Matusow, and also a story about these old guns of poker who are still making deep runs but don't get the respect they deserve. That could have been really compelling. Instead, we just have something that's just too unfocused, especially toward the back half. The first half is okay, but the second half starts to get really unfocused, and it's you know it's a little disappointing. It's not as disappointing as In Search of the American Dream or anything like that, but it's a little sad.
Well, also another, I guess the film tries to, educate the watchers by displaying like poker terms with definition, and I have to wonder, and that kind of implies that they would assume that someone watching this was not aware of what those terms meant, because I guess like as if it was from a complete poker amateur, unfamiliar with the poker world. And I feel like again, this is not directed towards that audience. It's really towards people that know poker or know Matusow or want to know more Matusow. Maybe they know about Raymer, but about Matusow. So I didn't feel like that was really needed either. I felt like that was sort of just thrown in because, oh yeah, we can just throw it in there. Why not? And I sometimes the term that they showed didn't always tie into the interview or the clip that was paired with it very well. Like maybe they mentioned it as part of the story, but I feel like it didn't quite gel quite right with how they were trying to use that.
Totally. That was totally unnecessary. In some of your interviews that you've done with poker players, they remembered hands with tremendous detail, and you asked questions, and you all discussed hands and what their thinking was and the mistake and this and that. None of that was in this film. None of it. So again, getting back to one of my earlier criticisms of what made him a great player, maybe he should have gone through some of his great wins and what he was thinking or how he dealt with it. Or maybe you guys just do a better job than the filmmaker did here. Maybe you should hire Sam and Ben for the next poker film. And well, I think they definitely should.
Well, hey, I mean, we're still trying to arrange Philip Helm versus Jerry Yang round two, or maybe Tilt season two. So why not throw it on our list of who our projects are to be done here? What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I'm a
Uh,
freelance writer, poker ghost. So, you know, feel free to hire me. We can do scripted dramas, we can do documentaries, we can do podcasts. I do it all. I have SEO experience, I have creative writing experience. So, yes.
Yeah, and as far as my sort of overall thoughts, I mean, I came into this film with very low expectations, and I also just am like this massive, like, love to hate, hate to love Matusow kind of fan. I mean, he's just so entertaining, whether he wins, whether he loses, whether he yells, whether he's joking around. He's just such a unique character, just in the world. Forget just poker, but just in general, he's such a weird oddball of a character. And so, I obviously thought that a good chunk of this film was very engaging and very raw and very real and very unique, where I hadn't seen, I've never seen a guy get, 10 shots in his back before, outside of just, my work, of course. But, like just that's just really unique to see just in a film. And, I've never seen a cat missing an ear before. I've never seen a cat, refuse to eat because they're on chemo. Like it's just some really weird stuff that I thought was worth seeing. And yet, had they, they captured some really compelling footage, which is really important for a documentary. It's just that they, didn't, put it into the best possible package for us to enjoy.
Perfect. Yeah.
So as far as giving a score, so I came in fully expecting to give us a 1 out of 5, and I joke, oh, I'm in the film, so 5 out of 5. But if I really sort of remove all my biases and everything, out of 5, I give it a 3 out of 5 because it was memorable, but flawed. And I feel like for me, 3 out of 5 is sort of the grade I give for a film of that broad category. How about you, Sam?
Yep, same here, 3 out of 5. That you hit the nail on the head. Another thing to kind of think about is intended audience who is this supposed to be. Ben and I know who Mike Matusow is. We've seen his podcast, we've seen interviews with him. We know his story. So, what I'm looking for is I know the literal story of Mike Matusow. I know he got arrested in 03, but who is he as a person? What is his, personality like? What is his life story like? And you do learn about him, as Larry said. You do get more of a sense of who he is as a person than you would from other poker media. But yeah, as you mentioned, there's just too many threads. There's too much stuff here that they just aren't exploring and aren't bringing together. But there are some very compelling moments, as we've all mentioned. So it's a 3 out of 5. It's a mixed bag. Would I recommend it? I mean, to somebody who wants to know about Mike Matusow, I guess I would. To somebody who's just like a general documentary enthusiast who wants to watch a good documentary, I don't think I would.
Larry, how about you?
So it's 2 stars for me, and I think what you just sort of said. Obviously, if you're interested in Mike Matusow, you're gonna watch it, right? But I think otherwise you're not gonna want to watch it. But again, we what we've talked about in this whole podcast, the compelling stuff is compelling and honest and kind of interesting. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong in my system. A 2 star movie is an okay movie, and a 3 star movie is a good movie. And I just can't call this a good movie, but I would call it okay. And I'm glad that I saw it. But I wouldn't go beyond that.
Yeah, this was like a $3 rental on Amazon Video. I think it's $10 if you want to purchase it on Amazon Video. And I actually saw on YouTube there is this indie movie YouTube channel that will have this film available for free in July. So clearly some sort of contractual, rights thing will, change in 6 months. So if you guys want to check this out on your own and not have to pay for it, I think that will be your best bet is just wait 6 months. I think the channel is called like indie movies on demand or something like that. Something like that. I can post it in the future for everyone to see, and you'll be able to check it out. And again, I feel like this is kind of film where if you made like an abridged version where you just isolate this 25 minutes of like 5 out of 5 stuff here, but it's dragged down by some historical events that me and Sam already know. Maybe it's new to Larry, maybe it's new to you, whatever. But I think that if you're able to skip around, like our TV sub didn't really have a good like fast forward rewind functionality. If you're able to kind of skip around, you're gonna probably have a more enjoyable time than we had for a lot of the footage here.
Mhm.
But I think that about wraps things up here for our talk here. Thank you for listening. It's been about an hour. We had a lot of fun discussing this, I'm sure. And again, this kind of falls for me kind of again in the middle tier of these poker docs we've watched because there's been like 2 or 3 I really loved, and then the rest of them are kind of meh or really boring. Like the Search for American Dream was pretty awful. But this again, I'm overall happy with this experience. And again, being in the film is still was still unbelievable. And I'm so happy that hopefully, this somehow that Vegas trip has spiraled into all these cool things that have happened. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and Mike is looking for reviews of the documentary. So if you want to watch the documentary, make a review of it, and maybe he'll shout you out on the podcast, and maybe he'll shout us on the podcast, especially because you're in it, Ben. So fingers crossed. And if you have any suggestions for anything else we can review, please go drop them in the comments. Any documentary, any book, we're kind of opening the door here to anything, and we're obviously still looking for interview requests as well. So if you're interested in being interviewed, we're happy to have you on.
Yeah. Oh, and Larry, one last question for you. I know that since you watched the film Deal with us a while back, would you recommend Deal over Matusow or vice versa?
Flip a coin.
All right, guys, enjoy your
All right.
poker, enjoy your TV, enjoy your poker on TV.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.